Hello all, good to be here. Sam and Ismail asked me to speak to you about regenerative agriculture, which is a topic that I've been personally very passionate about the last 5 years. And I think initially I will take you a little bit on the journey that I have been going through over the last, since 2017 essentially. And then we will have a bit of a Q&A, and hopefully you will all learn a little bit about regenerative agriculture in the theoretical and the practical sense afterwards. It's very fitting that we're in Portugal right now, because Portugal is also the place where my journey started in 2017. By now, a few friends of mine and me, we bought an abandoned village in central Portugal in the Serra da Estrela mountain range, and there we also have a few hectares of land, and that's what got me initially into the topic of essentially land management, as many of you who are probably listening to this are in as well. And maybe you went down the same rabbit hole that I went back then, because I started looking first at permaculture, and then through permaculture I found Richard Perkins, who's someone who's been really driving land management in a regenerative way for small-scale farmers forward. And then I got into this whole regenerative agriculture topic. And having been a bit of an academic in my 20s, I found academic papers from Wageningen University, which is one of the leading agricultural universities in Europe, which have been speaking about the potential of regenerative agriculture, and especially about the potentiality of sequestering carbon in the soil and building biodiversity through regenerative practices in the 80s and 90s already. So it's a topic that has been getting a lot of attention over the last 2-3 years especially, but essentially it is nothing new. And I think that's one of the first important things to say, that regenerative agriculture is using practices that have already been used and are being used by indigenous people all over the world. And it is something that we have been known as a concept for a long time. I think it just needed the time to be ripe for it. So the thing that is happening with our agricultural system, and that is the problem that we're experiencing right now, is that we have very much decoupled the way how we are farming from the way how nature is working. So currently our agricultural system is responsible for 24% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And the reason for that is that we are essentially releasing carbon, which is in the soil, through the practices that we're applying. So nature is quite magical in many different ways, and all of the plants that you see, for example, around me, like this tree behind me, are taking carbon out of the atmosphere through the process of photosynthesis. They're storing it in the tree, in the leaves, and then through the tree trunk it goes down into the soil, into the roots, and then under our feet, which you I think can't see right now, but wherever you are right now, I hope you're looking at some kind of tree or some kind of plant, and you're looking at soil. And in the soil level release, there's something like a Turkish bazaar going on. So essentially the roots of the plants are trading that carbon with mycorrhiza, which is mushrooms essentially, which are kind of like the Dutchmen of the soil, against other nutrients which they're eating, and against sugar. And this is the best way that we have at the moment of getting carbon out of the atmosphere. Now what we are doing is, we are focusing in our agricultural system not on nurturing this bazaar, but rather on increasing and maximizing the amount of yield that we're getting out of plants. And in order to do that, we are not using the natural processes, which is what we are doing in regenerative agriculture, but in industrial or conventional agriculture, we're using practices like plowing, for example, where we go into the soil, we cut all of the connections, we basically empty out the bazaar, we release the carbon through that, and then we're plowing and planting every year on an annual basis again. And so every year we're restarting the growing process again, and every year we're feeding the plants through outside and external inputs, such as fertilizers, such as pesticides, and products which we're essentially buying from chemical fertilizer companies, like you probably all heard about, Bayer, Monsanto, Syngenta, one of the less known ones, but also a massive one. And this is essentially the system that we have created right now, where farmers are not working with nature and not working with the natural process in the soil, but are working with additional supplements which they are buying, and by using annual processes in order to produce yield of plants which we are then eating, but which is not actually nourishing us as well. So this is the other end of this tail that we essentially are having, that due to the fact that this is the way how we're growing food, the food that we are growing is a lot less nutritious than it used to be, because it doesn't come from plants which are taking their nutrients from healthy soils, but it comes from external inputs which we are putting into it. In regenerative agriculture, we are trying to reverse these processes by essentially focusing the entire farming processes not just on the maximum amount of yield that we're having, but rather on how do we increase soil health. So how do we increase that bazaar? How do we continue with the trading that's going on there? And how do we make sure that we create an environment where plants can thrive in a natural system, as you would have, for example, also be having in a forest, or as you would be having in any kind of natural thriving environment that you have.